that he can. All right. We see in the green room that our buddy Pat Leonard has been good enough to
Yeah,
jump
there
in
he
with us
is.
here. And he's got
Good
some
to see
growth
you,
going
Pat.
on the chin.
Yeah.
Are you trying to catch up to me and McMullen with the gray beard working, Leonard?
I'm trying. I turned 40 a couple of weeks ago. So
You still got a ways to go. You got plenty.
Yeah, well,
Happy new league year officially, Pat. And I want to start this by giving you the mea culpa, because you're the first guy. I've covered the Eagles for a long time. So anybody talks about running backs, I say, you're nonsense. Stop it. You know, we go through this every year. And I saw Pat. I said, you know, the Eagles are interested. And I went, oh, well, what? And I had to start taking it a little bit more seriously. But even then, I admit, and there's the mea culpa, I admit, well, they're not going to $10 million. They might have interest if there's value and this and that. But man, Howie, like the player, thinks that presence will transform this offense like Christian McCaffrey did to the 49ers. I disagree with him, but that's another conversation. When did it become real for Pat Leonard?
Yeah, I agree with you, John. Like, I think even when I talked to several people who had the Eagles in that like small group of teams that were going to show interest when he hit the free agent market, I was still skeptical that they would, let's say, outbid the Bears financially, right? And it did turn out that the Bears were in on it. The Texans were actually, it was really Texans and Eagles down at the end. But I was with you that thinking that knowing Howie Roseman's track record, his ability to find value at that position and at non-premium positions on rosters, that it was like, is he really going to break the bank for this player? But really, as we got closer to the weekend, it became clear that the interest was, you know, they were going to put their money where their mouth was. And it really is about, like you just said, they don't view it as paying a running back. They view it as paying a weapon. But it was fascinating too. You know, you had to know Saquon a little bit to understand the reality of the Eagles happening as well, because it's the interest from the Eagles. It's also the interest from the Saquon side. But from my vantage point too, knowing that coming down the stretch as the tampering period was approaching, talking to people who were confirming for me after I had reported they were interested here, telling me this was interest that existed last year too. That the Eagles were one of the teams waiting on Saquon to hit the market a year ago, and then the Giants tagged him. The Giants were trying to get a deal done with Saquon to tag Daniel Jones. They couldn't do that, so they signed Daniel. They tagged Saquon. He thought, well, I'm not tagged at this point. I'm probably going to hit the market. I'm going to be able to talk to some of these suitors. That never transpired. But so the Eagles were essentially waiting 12 more months, and Saquon, in the back of his mind, waiting 12 more months to maybe have that conversation.
So let me ask you about offers, because there have been a good couple of reports over the last 24, 48 hours.
Yeah.
That the Giants never made Saquon a multi-year offer this year. They talked about it previously leading up to the tagging or whatever else. But after this season was over and done with, that the Giants never actually made a multi-year deal. And there has been some significant pushback from New York media, mostly Tiki Barber, but others as well, on how dare he go to the Eagles? How dare he side with a rival? Well, if the Eagles made him an offer and the Giants never made him an offer, how can you get mad at Saquon Barkley?
Well said, Jody. Well said. No, there was no counter offer. The agreement was he would bring something back to the Giants, see if they would match. But the Giants were telling people at the NFL Combine that they didn't see the value in spending $10 million a year on a running back. So Saquon's agent, Saquon Barkley himself.
Except they did it the year before by putting a tag on him.
Right. And so they all know, though, going in after coming out of the Combine so first of all, Saquon said coming out of the end of the season, just tell me whether you're going to tag me or not right now. Like, stop dragging this out. And the Giants didn't do that. They said, hey, let's regroup at the Combine. We'll talk there. It just dragged out to the point where no offer happened. And once they knew the Giants were telling people they weren't in the double digits this year in running backs, they knew that the offers that were coming out on the table, that the Eagles are going to be in on, the Texans in on that, they knew that it was going to be out of the Giants' price range. So it was not going to be anything the Giants were going to challenge. And, there's such a history over the last year behind why it came to that. really goes back to Barkley not being pleased with, number one, the guaranteed money in the Giants' original multi-year deals, and two, feeling slighted that it got leaked from, who knows where, but Saquon intimated that the Giants had said to him inside, like, let's keep all this in the building, and that leaks had come out making him look greedy. And so he kind of bit his tongue, swallowed his pride, came back and signed that adjusted franchise tag deal last year, didn't even hold out of training camp, which was a surprise to everybody. But culminating now here in this free agency period, it was kind of all coming to roost for both sides.
It's interesting because in some ways, from what you're describing, the Giants and the Eagles went Freaky Friday on us. They turned into each other. The Giants are the ones saying, let's get good value at a non-premium position, as you described, which I think is a great descriptor. And the Eagles went the Giants' direction. Let's go all in on the running back. Is it some ways, and I bring this up with McCaffrey as well, McCaffrey wasn't a great fit in Carolina, a rebuilding team. He was a perfect fit in San Francisco. So are they both right? Maybe the Giants are right, and they get value out of Devin Singletary for a lot less because they're not quite ready to be a contender. And maybe the Eagles are right too. Is that possible?
That's so well said, John. Is it, like from Joe Shane's point of view, is it as simple as, hey, Saquon might be perfect for that team, he's just not for us at that price point, right? And the Eagles conversely saying, we have a quarterback who has shown he can take us to a Super Bowl, but we also have to give him more help and kind of rejuvenate him, get him back to where he was, right? And it's also, Saquon's a piece that, he's a finishing piece is what you hope he is, right? Similar to the way Derrick Henry goes to Baltimore. Now, the Eagles finished the season much differently than the Ravens did, but they still think they have that kind of talent where if they add a Saquon Barkley, especially giving the offensive line that they hope consistently stays at that high level without Jason Kelce, that he can be the thing that puts them over the top. I think you're right. Joe Shane, this is one thing, even though he's made some, key mistakes and critical mistakes, especially building the O-line for the Giants, he does have a defined process. Like one thing I like about how he operates, and obviously coming off Dave Gettleman, everything's an upgrade, but the way that he really sensibly and diligently studies and evaluates the market, and he doesn't want to be caught up in overpays, especially when you have a roster with the Giants that is missing high-end talent at key spots, not just lacking in depth behind it. The Eagles conversely have a lot of high-end talent, some depth, but also are still filling those holes. So they are two teams at two different spots. So in a way, they are both addressing their needs accordingly.
But the phrase "hog mollies" has outlived Dave Gettleman. At least he's still got that going for him.
That's right.
The Giants ever close with Xavier McKinney? They made their decision on Barkley, never really had an offer on the table at the end when he decided to jump ship. Were they ever in the mix for McKinney, the best safety available? At least he's the highest paid so far in the free agent market. Where did that negotiation go?
They were, both sides wanted to make it work originally, but Mulugeta, McKinney's agent, he did good work here. So Winfield gets tagged. He represents him as well. And he could still end up getting a long-term deal, maybe at $20 million a year is one thing I heard, which would reset the safety market. But with him tagged and not free, McKinney vaulted to the top of the free agent market. And so if the Giants thought they were going to be able to get Xavier closer to the 13, 14, $15 million range, that wasn't going to happen. And so once that transpired and once that domino kind of shifted and fell over, it became a scenario where he was going to hit the market and it was just not going to be a deal that they could match. Like Joe Shane now has let two safeties walk. Like Julian Love 2 years ago went to Seattle.
Yeah, good player.
Right? Yeah. He was the Giants' leading tackler that season. And now Love actually overplayed his hand a little bit and got a little less money in Seattle than he would have gotten with the Giants due to kind of an oversaturated safety market that year. But still a key player that you don't let good players walk out the door when you're a bad team. But this is just a position that Joe Shane now has shown 2 years in a row he doesn't think is worth the money that the rest of the league thinks is worth, frankly. So they let two of their good players walk out the door. And that's why even though I like that Shane has a defined process and sticks to it, it's just hard to be a good team when you don't have a ton of good players to begin with and you let the talented ones walk out of your building. It's hard to stay relevant.
Yep.
Yeah, how deep from our perspective, it certainly looked like the Eagles were Xavier McKinney was their top option at the safety position. How close were the Eagles there from what you heard? And they shifted to CJ Gardner-Johnson, but they had a lot of respect for Xavier McKinney as a potential playmaker.
Yeah, no, they were players, but Green Bay, I think, they were always the front runner. There's connection to Derek Ansley there, who coached McKinney back at Alabama, and along with them, telling them, coming into the free agents negotiating period, that essentially they were going to break the bank and value that position. For McKinney, I don't think it was about Green Bay over Philly. I think it was just about being paid like a top 5 safety. So where the Eagles saw a lot of value there, but they just weren't getting to the Packers level.
All right, crystal ball time, Mr. Leonard. Who will start the most games at quarterback for the New York Giants this year?
Wow, that's a good pivot there.
Yeah.
Okay, the most starts for the Giants this season at quarterback, I will say JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, JJ. I was going to say Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, or JJ McCarthy, and Pat beat me to it because I think the Giants may take that leap with JJ McCarthy. It's interesting because I think people around the league value JJ McCarthy a heck of a lot more than most fans or draft analysts. And yeah, well, I get it because Michigan played the way Michigan played, and it's hard to say, hey, the 6th pick in the draft, we're limiting him. But is that J.J. McCarthy's fault? What's your sort of early scouting report there?
It's so funny. Yeah, you did describe accurately, I think, the kind of dichotomy that exists between, even just one person's opinion to the next in the league on a quarterback like McCarthy. I think why he fits for the Giants is, okay, if I wanted to win a game right now in the NFL, I'd rather have Michael Penix as the quarterback over JJ. But if I were the Giants, what they want to do, because they're hemmed in by Jones's contract for this season before they can get out of it. So McCarthy, to me, is the guy who has the upside, could use the year of development, sit behind the quarterback, learn. Maybe he jumps in halfway through the year, whatever the case is. Now, that's all well and good to talk about, obviously, in New York and Philadelphia, these places. When you draft a quarterback high, if your starter isn't very good and the kid looks like he's close to ready, he plays, right? Like we know that these guys play. But, it's really interesting because with the Giants trading for Brian Burns, they gave up their higher of this 2 second-round picks they had. And so now they don't have as much ammo to move up the board to go get one if they want one. And there really are still a lot of teams up top in the draft who need quarterbacks who could try to trade over them. Let's say to 4 or 5, even if the top 3 go QB. So will it be a JJ at 6? If not, I don't think they're going to get him because enough of these teams have a high opinion on him. But it could be a guy in the back of the first round in a trade up, or even just using that 47th overall in the second round and doing their own version of a Jalen Hurts pick. Joe Shane even said he's on the record saying this is a good quarterback draft and not just at the top. So, I know Tennessee's, Joe Milton's a guy that they've studied closely. Rattler, I think, has had a really good, kind of spring so far, but he's not necessarily the height that they typically look for. But there are QBs later in the draft that you can look at that the Giants could bring in and develop. But they're in a tough spot at that position, you guys know.
I need your opinion on the Giant defense coming into the year. Last year, they had Wink Martindale there, which I'm sure there's still a percentage of Eagle fans who are bummed out that Wink's not going to be here because they love the blitz here in Philadelphia. So there's going to be a certain sea change in New York this year with Wink out.
Yeah.
You like the direction of defense? Adding Brian Burns is going to make your defense better. You know that, but losing Xavier McKinney, not. New DC, new way of playing defense. What's the Giant defense going to look like this year?
It's going to be very different. I think there were times the defense really struggled last year, but I think that the defense was really the only like NFL ready part of their team all season last year. So I think it's not easy. You can't just say, hey, they added Brian Burns and they have this talent and they're going to be able to sustain on that or improve on that. The difference will be more a 3-4 look, a lot more zone in the back than Wink runs, a lot of the press man and the blitzing on third down. This is going to be under Shane Bowen, who comes from the Tennessee Titans and was one of many people that the Giants interviewed and pursued before Bowen ended up getting the job, coming off of all the dysfunction they had during the season on their coaching staff, with Brian Dable really being on the hot seat coming into the year. But, Brian Burns was a piece that defensive end, whoever they landed there, that was a priority for them, because with a 4-man pass rush, you have Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence. You needed an edge over there who was going to take pressure off those guys and get to the quarterback. Obviously, they're not done, but you're right. Losing McKinney's a blow. Bobby Okereke was he's been Shane's best free agent signing in 3 years. He was a really good addition last year, but I think it's going to be tough. Their secondary is very thin. Outside of Deonte Banks, who they drafted in the first round last year, not a lot going on. They did sign the Green Goblin, Jalen Mills.
Yeah, Jalen Mills.
Still
going, man.
Yeah,
Amazing.
Excited to see him up here.
Great guy too. Great guy.
I've heard that and noticed that from afar. I've never met him, but he's going to be a Swiss Army knife for them. I would imagine, based on how he played for the Patriots more recently than his time with the Eagles winning the Super Bowl there. But they have a lot of work to do on the personnel side. I know I kind of keep coming back to that in all these elements, but they're not anywhere close to the team they need to be to sustain success.
Yeah. Well, rush and cover and rush. You could do a lot worse than Thibodeau, Burns, and Dexter Lawrence up front. I mean, those guys are going to make most secondaries look better, at least on paper. So it's a good place to build on foundationally when you have 3 guys like that. Offensive line, I mean, that's the issue. And Saquon didn't have a great statistical season. And, the context is the offensive line was that bad and the quarterback play was that bad.
Yeah.
John Runyon, there's a guy I looked at, said, you know what? Maybe the Eagles should get another John Runyon. Giants got him, paid him a lot. They got the kid from Las Vegas as well. Still a lot of work to do, though, on that offensive line, Pat.
Yeah, for sure. Those were 2 targeted signings. Guard was a priority coming in. I thought they were going to spend bigger on the guard market, but those prices ended up being in the $20 million a year range. The Robert Hunts and Jonah Jacksons of the world. Kevin Dotson re-signing with the Rams. So they pay $10 million a year. They get Runyon. Should end up being their starting right guard. Illuminor, the tackle from Vegas. So what they want to do is give Evan Neal one more shot at winning the right tackle job. Illuminor could then be the swing tackle behind those guys, because when Thomas went down last year, they just had nobody to put in behind him who was capable. But I think there's a good chance that eventually you see their line looking like Thomas, Neal at left guard, Schmitz at center, Runyon at right guard, and Illuminor at right tackle. But there's still work to do. They were heavy on the guards in the draft as well. Like the Giants, the Steelers, the Panthers, the Jets, the Jaguars. Like, these are teams that are really honed in on offensive guards, even starting back at the Senior Bowl. I think the kid Isaiah Adams from Illinois was a guy that the Giants were, met with twice and were putting up on the board a lot in Mobile, Alabama. So they understand. And Joe Shane knows that that's the priority. Like, the Brian Burns was the biggest swing so far, especially from the contract they gave him, which was, I'm still blinking looking at those numbers, but the offensive line it's going to make or break their season.
Let me ask you about, and last question, and we thank you for hopping on, Pat. What happened to Evan Neal? I thought coming out of college that he was going to step in and be a guy who's going to grab a tackle position and hold it for a decade. Yeah. And the only tackle that I can think of that's been a bigger underachiever than him is Mekhi Becton with my Jets, who's absolutely stunk. At least Evan Neal, I think there is still some potential upside. There's none with Beck. What happened?
A few things. So technically he's a little top heavy. The way they were coaching him early, working him, if you get him leaning forward as a pass rusher, it's over. He was working on that early. Those were some of the technical stuff he was working on, his hands. And then another thing, like talking to some of his, teammates, like Justin Pugh recently was on my podcast, was talking about how even though Neal played some right tackle in college, you remember he played one season at left tackle, one at left guard, one at right tackle, but that he is comfortable on the left. That doesn't mean he can't play on the right, but there is some belief that if he slides just to the left of the line, whether it's guard or tackle, that he would improve a little bit. But the top two are mentally, all the criticism here got to him. And this happened to Andrew Thomas too, before he steadied himself.
Right. He steadied himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
he's
Thomas,
a really good player, and he started slow. So
yeah. And what he was doing, what Andrew was doing when he was younger, and what Neal has done a little bit of too, and this is just young people in general now, and even me on my phone too much, but they're seeing all the criticism of themselves when they have one bad play. And one of the plays in the Miami game kind of tipped the scales, where people were essentially blaming him for something that wasn't necessarily his fault. And that's when he vented, did an interview with Daryl Slater from NJ.com, he, blasted the fans, used that phrase saying, people were flipping hot dogs and hamburgers, criticizing me. I'm paraphrasing, but
right.
That's the mental maturity side that he has been working on. The final piece, though, and this is a key one, is the Giants misdiagnosed his ankle injury midway through the season. He gets hurt in Vegas, and initially they were rehabilitating him as if it was a sprain, but it turned out it was a fracture. And so they had him rehab all the way up to being on the field in a uniform, doing drills on the side, starting to ramp up, and things weren't right. And they take him back in and they realize it's a fracture. And so that's why we didn't see him down the stretch of the season. And that set him back in multiple ways as well. So he's been here at the facility, he's been grinding and rehabbing. And so they realize that they owe him one more shot. I think this isn't something specifically someone said to me, but me doing all the reporting on all these details, like they know they owe him like one more fair shot at it.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting. They need to be better on the offensive line if they're going to be a better team than they were last year. Pat Leonard's always fun. Podcast again. Talking ball with Pat Leonard, correct?
Yeah, talking ball. I like the hat. Look at that.
That's right.
Talking ball with Pat Leonard.
The big hat.
At PL on NFL. That's like TikTok and Instagram. It's at P Leonard, NYDN. You can read him at the New York Daily News. Tremendous job. He was the first guy I said when Pat says it, I start to take notice, and I still didn't believe it. So I'm offering my mea culpas. Well done. It's good to see you do a tremendous job covering the league and the New York Giants. And yeah, talking ball with Pat Leonard.
Thanks, Jody and John. You guys are great. And this is, I haven't been this excited to see a player's season in a while. Like Saquon on the Eagles, I'm looking forward to this.
Very much so. And if the Eagles get J.J. McCarthy in the draft, we're going to have you right back on and go, you made it happen again, Leonard. We got to give you credit. Pat, a pleasure. Thanks for jumping in with us today.
Take care. Thank you.
Pat Leonard, New York Daily News, here with us on Birds 365. All right, Jody Mac coming back. You know what we're going to do, put a bow on the show.